Glenn Loury here. This is the Glenn Show. Glenn and John, we're the black guys at bloggingheads.tv.
Might it not be useful to be flexible, take a deep breath and say, okay, yes. And it's funny, Charles Krauthammer made an argument like this for very cynical reasons, but just say, yes, pump the money in. It's interesting. I'm imagining, I think I'm black, so I guess I would get all this money that I didn't earn. I can't say I would complain, but yeah, then there are black people who really need it. So there's all this money. And maybe we would also set up poor black people who haven't ever had that much money before to know how to do something with it, because a lot of them would understandably not know. And then maybe that's it. You know, the idea being, okay, the reparations were granted and there you go. But my problem, and I'm done, is that I know in my gut, just like I knew about Brett Kavanaugh, but in this case, yes, I'm going with my gut. It wouldn't be over. You know, if we did that here, all the same people would be just as mad, and they would all be saying reparations is just a beginning, not an end. And there'd be all these smart pieces written by the younger people with 3 names about how it's quote unquote problematic to think that you can make up for 400 years with payments. It wouldn't be the end. And so I'm not sure why we should even do it when we both know that the frame of mind that leads to this call for reparations is an emotion and an identity rather than a political program, and that nothing will ever make those people feel like both shoes have dropped. What do you think?
I think a number of things. I like this point at the end about how it's not a political program, and I want to come back to that because it's not. I want to make a couple of observations. What defenders of the reparations advocacy would say would be, we're not just asking for cash. That's a trivialization of the claim that we're making. We don't expect a check to be mailed out to every African-American. We're asking for, and then there'll be a laundry list, money going to scholarships for kids to go to college, or, hyping up investment in African-American communities so that they have more opportunity, more jobs, or whatever. So they'll say that. What the politicians are going to say is, I'm not saying do reparations, I'm saying study it. They're going to get behind the legislation that the former Congressman John Conyers from Detroit would introduce in every session of Congress. And he was there for a long time. It would never get out of committee, but he would always come up with the idea the commission should be impaneled to study the idea of reparations. So they'll say, I'm not saying do it, I'm just saying study it, I'm saying take it seriously. So I just wanted to put those things as caveats. I think I have a couple of conceptual points that I want to make. What about groups that have a lot of wealth? Okay, if you're going to talk about a wealth gap, let's talk about all the wealth gaps. What about the Jews? Let's look at who's a billionaire in this country. Okay, if I see an overrepresentation of some group amongst the billionaires, what does that tell me? Does it tell me that they were lucky? Does it tell me that their ancestors were corrupt? Do they have their wealth because they stole it from somebody? Is wealth a zero-sum game? You got it, I don't have it. It's because you took it from me or your ancestors took it from my ancestors. So if we're going to have a discussion about wealth, let's put all the cards on the table. What about people who've got a lot of it? Are they entitled to it? Did their group do something wrong to get it, et cetera? The other thing I want to say is I find this focus on wealth really very interesting, because the same people who are talking about the wealth gap between the races would be against the Republicans who want to get rid of the inheritance tax. And yet, conceptually, they're on the same side of the argument. Namely, I'm entitled to the benefits that my ancestors generated, some of whom were robbed of that benefit, but it was my property, my entitlement. So when a farmer in Kansas says, I want to be able to hand my land over to my son so that he can continue to farm it, or a small business person in Cincinnati says, I've got a shop on the corner, it's worth $10 million, and I want that to go to my children. Get out of here with your 60% or your 30% tax on my inheritance. They're making, in a way, the same kind of claim that a person who says, my ancestors were enslaved, you owe me something because they never got the fruits of their labor. They're saying they're entitled to the benefit of a previous generation's work, not something you did, something your ancestors did. And to the extent that that's a valid claim, the people who say that they want to be able to pass their wealth on without federal taxation to their progeny are also making the same kind of claim. So those are some things, but I said this recently in talking with, I think it was Robert Cherry a couple of weeks ago in a previous Glenn Show post. This is a terrible idea, not only because it's impractical or impolitic. I don't know how you're going to get 50.1% of the country to agree to this as a matter of policy. It's a terrible idea because it frames the moral claims that African Americans legitimately have on the country in the wrong way. It commodifies something that shouldn't be commodified. It turns it into a quid pro quo. It makes it a negotiation between population aggregates, the blacks on one side of the aisle, everybody else on the other side of the aisle, talking about transfers, when in fact, what we should be doing is building political coalitions and advocating for progressive policies that lift everybody in the country, not just making racial claims. The idea that you could discharge this obligation. So we have these massive ghettos in which millions of people live with less opportunity. The schools don't work. The streets are violent. There aren't any jobs. There's a lot of poverty. Kids are in gangs. There's a terrible amount of homicide that's going on. So we have serious problems. And we're going to talk about the underrepresentation of African Americans at the upper end of the educational hierarchy in a moment. We have serious issues in terms of African American disadvantage. The idea that this is a debt that can be paid is a terrible, terrible idea. Suppose it were to succeed and you were to get payment. I don't know what the number would be, $25,000 a head, $50,000, $25,000, $50,000, you're already up in the many hundreds of billions of dollars, but let's suppose it was something like that. The idea that you'd say to the country, look, you owe us something, and then you get paid. Now, people are done. Now you've been paid. You don't have any more claim. When the incarceration rate amongst African Americans is higher by a factor, order of magnitude, when the school failure rates, when the unemployment rates, when the poverty rates and so forth persist, because they are going to persist, the basis for you to be able to command the country's attention to address those problems has been eviscerated because you've commodified it and you've taken the money. So that to me is one thing, but it also, it seems to me, conceives of the country not as we are all in this together, all being Americans obligated to one another because of our national obligations and so forth. It makes us into these identity groups and then puts us on one or the other side of a bargaining table. And then we're up there striking a bargain. I can see no justification for dealing with the problems of the Black poor, specifically as Black people, without dealing with the problems of the poor. I don't see how a white person in, I don't know, Eastern Kentucky or Southwestern Ohio or whatever, can be expected to shoulder a burden that's directed toward alleviating Black suffering when they're suffering too. And I don't understand why we as African Americans should want that. So, I mean, that's the kind of argument I try to make.